Hi guys, KatimaGaming here. I hope you're all having a wonderful day. On today's episode, we're going to be looking at some benchmarks on the RTX 3080. But we're not just going to do any benchmarks that's already been all over the internet. No. We're going to run some games on my 5-year-old rig and see how bad the bottleneck really is at 1440p. If you watched my previous episodes, guys, you would know that I'm actually coming from a GTX3080 Ti, which is actually 5 years old, way back in 2015, and before moving on to the 3080. But I installed the 3080 on a rig with an i7, get this, an i7-4790K with 16 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM. Don't worry, I already had an 850 watt power supply to begin with, so I'm good on that sector. But I wanted to show you guys how bad it really is to be going for a 3080 on a rig that's actually 5 years old and gaming at 1440p ultra-wide 21:9 resolution. Now, for those of you who are going to go straight at me and say, whoa, KatimaGaming, why are you still gaming on a 5-year-old rig and an i7-4790K? I mean, you suck, man. What are you doing with a tech channel anyways? Okay, whoa, first of all, first world problems. And second of all, y'all rich kids don't understand. I don't make money from YouTube. Okay, as a matter of fact, I'm actually losing money from YouTube. I just do this for fun and use this channel as an example for my students, and hopefully maybe you guys can learn a thing or two on the way as well. We're too used to watching big tech channels with the latest and greatest tech, but this channel is just for the everyday folks, okay? So now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about how the i7-4790K is doing with the 3080. And spoiler alert, guys, it's not doing too well. But there is a silver lining, okay? Not every game sucks. There are some games that are designed differently, and some do better than other games. So on this benchmark, we're going to be running the 4790K on a stock 4 gigahertz on the MSI Z97S Crate Edition motherboard with 16 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM. Don't worry about the RAM. DDR3 or DDR4 makes very little difference when it comes to gaming. We're going to be running all these games on SSDs, and the main focus is to see how much bottleneck you'll be getting and how much potential you're actually wasting with a 3080 on a very old CPU. Okay, just a quick refresher for those of you who are not in the know. If you don't know what a bottleneck is in gaming terms, it's simply when one component of your system is actually more powerful than the other component to be keeping up. The term bottleneck is actually popularized with traffic terminologies where, you know, cars are driving really fast on a big road, but when the lanes get smaller and the road gets smaller and the lanes get fewer, those cars start squeezing together. Even though they're driving very fast, they have to slow down because the road gets smaller. So the amount, still the same amount of cars, but they all have to slow down because the road just got smaller. So that's actually bottlenecking in a nutshell. For the CPU and GPU, I'd like to call it an opposite bottleneck, where because everything actually starts with the CPU. This is a very common kind of bottlenecking actually in gaming when your CPU is so much slower than your GPU, because in this case, my 5-year-old i7-4790K is ancient compared to the new and shiny RTX 3080. This is, again, very common among gamers because they usually try to upgrade their GPU first before saving up and upgrading to a new CPU. That's very normal with a lot of gamers. So because we all know getting the GPU is very important because it does all the heavy lifting. So how does it work? Well, everything, like I said, starts with the CPU. When you start a game and you're starting to play, the CPU actually renders the first frames in a video game and then sends that frame to the GPU. The GPU then pretties it up, okay? The GPU adds all the shaders, the graphics, the pretty effects, and then crunches that. All of those are crunched by the CPU, then sent to your monitor. If your CPU can't catch up, your GPU will just wait and start to idle because the GPU is so fast, like, done, I'm done. The CPU is like, wait for me. It's like, no, I'm done, I'm waiting, keep coming. So most of the time when they say that's wasted potential is simply because the GPU is working so much faster, it ends up just waiting on the CPU to send the next frames. So this means that you're wasting power and the full potential of those graphics cards, especially if it's nice and shiny GPU. So let me dramatize it so that you can get a better idea. I'm working on it, sir. Wait for me. Just 1 second. Getting those frames up.
Oh, puny i7, come on, give me frames already. Oh, you so slow. I'm still waiting for it. Oh, come on, very, very slow. Do you know who I am? I'm 3080.
Yes, sir. 1 second, sir. Here's the next frame. Here's.
Oh my gosh, finally, one frame. Oh, here, monitor, you take it.
Oh my god. Finally a frame to display. You know, I'm a 37-inch monitored 1440p that can go all the way to 100 frames per second, right?
I know, right? I'm 3080. I can crunch all this 1080p, 1440p, 4K. I crunch everything. But this puny i7 4790K, he not give me enough to crunch, eh?
Sorry. I'm really sorry. I'm doing all I can. I'm doing all I can.
Puny i7. If only owner can afford more like a 10900K, we wouldn't have this problem, monitor, right?
Right, yeah, I know. I'm just waiting here, man. Give me those frames already so I can display it.
Waiting. Come on, i7. Let's go, 4790K. Let's go, 4 gigahertz.
I'm doing my best. Right here, next frame.
Oh, finally, here you go.
Oh my gosh, finally another frame. Here you go, to the monitor. Come on, man. I can go 100, man. Come on, let's go.
I know, right? Come on, i7, mush. Mush, give me those frames. Give me those frames.
Doing my best.
Puny i7 4790K. Huh.
All right, here we go. Everything on Ultra 50. We're dropping onto the 40 frames. Look at the top left, how much CPU and how much the GPU is working. You can see on the left side, CPU is going 100%. The GPU is just loading up at 70, 60%. That's not a problem. CPU is running 100%. It's just 100%. GPU is just like, I'm waiting. When it drops, that means it's idle, meaning it's just waiting for the CPU to send something. So when the CPU spikes, it'll be followed up by the GPU. Okay, 30 frames, pretty okay. Pretty okay. The bottleneck is real, guys. This is a 3080. It's supposed to be crunching these frames easy. Let's take a look at the results. Okay, so the average is 38 frames per second. Almost everything is on ultra, anti-aliasing and the high. As you can see, graphics quality here, ultra, VSync off, anti-aliasing high, full screen, field of view at 85%. On 1440p with no modifiers on the resolution. i7 4790K at 3080. The VRAM it used, as you can see the serious bottleneck here. The VRAM it just used was 4 gigabytes out of the available 10 gigabytes that it had. Okay, so basically you could see that the GPU isn't really being pushed that hard because the CPU is not being able to catch up. So that's one. You could always see the load was at 100% on that CPU. It's doing everything it can. All right, let's move on to the next game. All right, here we go. So, surprisingly, the game's doing okay. 40 frames. If you look at the CPU load, it's not that high. And the GPU's barely hitting 50%. I'm on 40 frames per second. Our GPU's at 40% as well. All right, there you have it. 50, we're going up to 50, 60 frames. All in ultra. Okay, there you have it. So, overall, what do we have here? We have minimum frames at 33 frames per second. We're getting a max of 60. It's doing better than Assassin's Creed. Now, like I said, every video game has its own architecture, has its own design running in its own different engine. So basically, if you're running, let's say Far Cry 5, it probably has a different engine. It's working better on the CPU and GPU. So silver lining here is that even with a 3080, you can still run games decent. Drop it down just a tad bit to get higher frames. But if you're pushing everything to ultra, no chance. You can't get anything above an average of 40 frames per second. So that's the real bottleneck here, which you are getting. I am happy, though, to see that the CPU and the GPU are working together pretty well. But again, it's not using up that much VRAM, so it should be able to crunch more frames per second, but CPU is bottlenecking. Okay, let's move on to the next game. Okay, benchmark is going. We're hitting 30 frames, 40 frames, not bad. GPU and CPU under the 100% load. Draw distance and views, 35 frames. That's okay. I can live with that. Now remember, these are all in ultra. Okay, particles, 40 frames per second. Not bad. No jittering. And being able to hold a decent 30 frames is okay. Oh, look at that. Vista. This is the oldest game. This is 2017, by the way. And it, as you could see, numbers not so flattering. We're getting an average of 36 frames per second, maxed out at 43. Now, this game is very, very tough. For some reason, I could not, even if I tried, even in low settings, I couldn't even get it past 80 frames per second. And that's clearly bottlenecking, because that goes to show the CPU just can't catch up with the GPU in games like this. All right, let's move on to Red Dead Redemption, my favorite. All right, it started us strong. Look at that. GPU's at 100% here. It is pushing those pixels. I mean, in the snow particles in Red Dead Redemption 2 is pretty harsh. It's pretty harsh, but we're getting 40, 50 frames. That's pretty decent. For example, the swamp area, we're getting good. It's pretty good. Look at that. 40, 50 frames per second. Everything in ultra on an old i7-4790K. That's not bad. All right, we're at the desert biome. Well, it's low light, so it's crunching those pixels easy. All right, here we're going into the different towns. Details absolutely amazing as it starts loading up. All right, here comes the real benchmark right here with some gameplay. Oh, details are pretty okay. Oh, it's dropping to 40 now, coming outside. He's making a run for it. 40 frames, not bad. Oh, look at all that detail. He shot a cop. I shot the sheriff. Ah, fire in the hole. See if the frames will drop here. Nope. 50 frames. That's not bad. That's not bad, considering everything is almost ultra. Everything's maxed out at i7-4790K on a 3080. This isn't bad at all. Oh my gosh. So there you have it, guys. As you can see, there are some serious bottlenecks going on with the i7-4790K working with the RTX3080. The problem is very simple. The CPU just can't work fast enough, and the GPU is just chilling on the side. Some games do still work great, though, with the CPU-GPU combo. Red Dead Redemption 2 was surprisingly well optimized. As a matter of fact, Apex, Fortnite, Path of Exile, all of those games absolutely have no problem with the i7-4790K paired with the RTX 3080. All of these multiplayer games are well optimized to make sure that the masses get into that game, as many of them as possible can get into the game. Down the line, though, in the future, especially, wow, with Cyberpunk just around the corner, max settings might not be practical anymore. As a matter of fact, had I optimized the game with NVIDIA's GeForce Experience, most of these games would run just fine at high settings, and I could squeeze in 80 to 90 frames easy. My Acer 34X can go up to 100 hertz, so getting close to that is pretty satisfying. These frames were impossible for me to actually achieve with the 980 Ti, even with the game settings at medium or low, so the 3080 still has a really huge value for me. So the biggest question is, if you're on a 4790K or maybe something newer, a 6700 or a 7700, somewhere near that, should you upgrade? Well, like I said, the problem is simple, but the solutions are very, very complicated. It's not as simple as swapping the CPU. You can't just do that because different generations of CPU are compatible with different generations of motherboard and their sockets. Future-proofing obviously has its limitations. I thought when I bought my rig in 2015, I future-proofed everything. And there are a lot of problems with that. I will talk about that in the next episode, especially with my i7 and my new RTX card. So for now, this is all the knowledge I can impart for you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned a thing or two. If you have any questions or comments, go straight down there. I'm always active in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in our past, present, and future videos. Sawasdee krap!
Do my best, sir. Do my best as fast as I can.
This is ridiculous. That's right. I'm 3080. Very sexy.